Our contestants this period, I will introduce them one by one. We have Dr. Nelson. We have Ms. Angelos. And we have Ms. Belstra. All right, we are going to have you stand kind of in a wide sort of triangle. So Ms. Belstra, if you can come on over here. Come over here. You might want to cover your heads. Mr. Schmidt is not good at this. Yeah, stand back. So he is going to flip the rubber chicken in the air, and whichever the person is whose head the chicken is pointing to is going to go first. So, on your marks, get set, flip the chicken. Ms. Belstra is our first contestant. So, audience members, you want to be listening to her story very carefully and trying to determine what questions you would ask to find out if she's lying or telling the truth.
All right. I'm tall. How's everybody doing? Good. They call it Seidel's Suck Hole. It's the place where I almost died. You may not know this about me, but I lived in Colorado for over 20 years. Believe it or not, in those 20 plus years, I never skied once. I did a lot of other mountainy, outdoorsy kinds of things, but skiing wasn't one of them. But my friends and I did some pretty serious whitewater rafting. For about 5 or 6 years in a row, actually, we would get a big group of people together and we'd sign up for like a 2-day rafting trip down the Arkansas River, which is considered some of the finest rafting in the Rocky Mountains. We'd hire a company to guide us, and after like the 3rd year, we got a little cocky. We were feeling like we knew what we were doing. We could handle ourselves in a boat. We knew if we ever went over the side, we had to point our feet downstream, grab our paddle in our hands, and make it down. We knew how to high five after a really tough rapid. I don't know if you guys know how that works, but you're all in the boat and you raise your paddles up together, clink them together, and smack them down on the water and go, woo! So the prime time to raft the Arkansas is in the spring, when the river is essentially water that was like snow just a few hours before. And that water was just freaking cold. The winter before, it dumped a ton of snow in the mountains, so the waters were really high. So high we couldn't do a section of the river that we normally did. It was just too dangerous. They called that section the Numbers because they used to run kayak races through there, so it was like rapid number 1, number 2, etc. It was a super intense piece of water, and we'd mastered it before, but I can't tell you all those stories because this is about Seidel's Suck Hole. So because we couldn't raft the Numbers, we decided to do Browns Canyon 2 days in a row. Now, Browns Canyon is sedate compared to the Numbers. It's got a couple of good rapids, but most of it's pretty calm. The second to last one before you take out, though, is called, you guessed it, say it with me, Seidel's Suck Hole. So this particular rapid, it drops down into a hole, and then there's a big wave, and you either crest it and come out, or you flip. So you can imagine at high water, it's a killer. So our first day running Browns Canyon, we had a blast. Our boat had about 5 people in it, and our guide, whose name I can't remember, but let's call him Gus. I like that name. I always liked sitting on the back end of the raft because you got a good ride through the rapids, and I always took my spot next to Gus on the back. So Seidel's Suck Hole is the second to the last rapid of the day, and there's a pool at the bottom, so other rafts and kayakers and even people on the bank would just sit and watch boats and rafts come through this to see if they would survive or not. So the first day, Gus pulled us over to the shore before the suck hole and said, okay, let's get out and scout it, everybody. So we climbed up to this big cliff, looked down on it, and I remember thinking, dang, that looks really scary. And he's like, we got this. So we all climbed back into the raft, and he yelled, this was the command that he would say, forward paddle! And we hit that rapid so perfect. It was beautiful. We crested it, the boat just popped right out. All the people were like, on the side of the river just going, yeah! So we had this epic high five. It was like Seidel's Suckhole did not suck. Day 2, another great day. We ran through all those rapids perfectly. They had these crazy names like Pinball, Zoom Flume, Egg Beater, Hemorrhoid Rock. Seriously. End of the day, we're back to Seidel's Suckhole. Are we going to scout it? I asked Gus, and he said, nah, we got this. I know right where to put us. So I remember him saying that with a little smirk on his face, so we all smirked too, right? We got this. In fact, we got a little judgy as we watched the other boats go through in front of us. We were like, yeah, they did okay, decent form, whatever. So it was our turn. We set up probably 50 yards upstream. Forward paddle, he shouted, and we dug in, headed for that sweep spot that would get us through the rapid without consequence. We hit the drop, the front of the raft went down, and you know how you get really lucid when something bad or painful is happening to you, like you remember every detail later when running over it in your mind? So all these years later, I still remember all of that with perfect detail. I remember how the frigid water literally took my breath away, and I went under so fast I didn't have a chance to grab a breath. So I was literally sitting on the back of the raft one second, and the next I was underwater. I was just going down and down and down. I was thinking, really? This is how I'm going to die? This is why they make us sign a waiver? My mind was racing, trying to think of an exit strategy. How do I get out of this? It was like I was a sock in a washer just being batted around. I remember my feet touching the bottom of the river and trying to push back off, but there was an unseen hand holding me down there, and I couldn't grab a breath. I was being sucked into the suckhole. Life jackets work. I'm here. The physics of it all popped me back up to the surface, way down the river. My paddle was gripped tight in my fist. My feet were pointed downstream. I gasped for breath, but I was alive. My friends hauled me back into the raft. My teeth were chattering. The adrenaline was still just pumping through my body, and I remember thinking, this is why they call it Seidel's Suckhole, because it sucks.
Sounds plausible, but maybe not. So Dr. Nelson is just going. We're not even having the chicken decide. You're just ready. No, it's good. I'd rather you decide than the chicken because Mr. Schmidt's feeling a little feisty, and so, yeah. This is Dr. Nelson. So again, be thinking, is she telling you the truth or is she lying to you?
What's your favorite food? An important life question is whether you live to eat or whether you eat to live. I am undeniably an eat to live person. Maybe for you, it's not that black and white, but regardless, there is something in the food kingdom that lights you up. The food that is clearly your go-to when you're not just hungry, but when you're looking for a certain kind of comfort. When your mom asks you what you want her to serve at your birthday party, when you dream of the perfect meal. What is that food for you? Ice cream, chocolate, steak, tacos? My food love affair is with the scrumptious trio of pasta, pizza, and bread. Yes, you might say. Pizza is on everyone's list. Everyone loves pasta, bread, heck yeah, sign me up. Come with me on this short but chronological narrative about my favorite cuisine. I'd like to peel back the layers of both the metaphorical and literal deliciousness of a food that feeds my soul. First, pasta. In my Scandinavian household, we weren't conversant really with the term pasta. Rather, we spoke in terms of spaghetti, macaroni, and lasagna. Okay, this was the 70s, so it was just noodles. I just knew I loved noodles. I was that kid who asked for buttered noodles for every meal. I was a picky eater, so when the rest of my family ate a variety of things like hamburgers, casseroles, and other typical foods of the 70s and 80s, I pretty much stuck to plates of buttered noodles or mac and cheese with ketchup. Gross, I know, but I didn't know better. I don't know why my mom agreed to that whole scenario, but as I got older, I discovered that sauce was actually a very fine addition to spaghetti noodles. A perfect night would be coming home from school or practice, walking in the door and smelling my mom's spaghetti sauce or lasagna bubbling in the oven. Meat sauce meant ground beef, tomato paste, water, and the spaghetti sauce packets you buy in the store. Lasagna meant layered noodles with the same meat sauce plus cheddar cheese. Don't judge her, she was doing her best, and it was 100% good enough for me. On those nights, the only thing better than smelling the spaghetti or lasagna was when I walked into the door and spotted a loaf of Italian bread, soon to become garlic toast, smothered in butter. These were jackpot nights. Pizza, the other part of my love affair. Most of you grew up in the Chicago area and had a lifelong access to amazing pizza. I never knew what was missing, but I still love pizza. I grew up on the West Coast, where perhaps the most famous pizza topping was Canadian bacon with pineapple. I liked that okay, but I actually had a side obsession with black olives. This is a whole other storyline that I'd love to go into, but for now, just know that starting at the age of 8, black olives on my cheese pizza was the new version of my picky eating habits. For my 13th birthday, my parents planned a surprise party. Besides the thrill of becoming a teenager, the night was a feast. It started with my family going to the local spaghetti factory, a small chain restaurant that I believe was and is maybe a Pacific Northwest phenomenon. I thought that was the big thrill of the night, an early dinner of spaghetti and all-you-can-eat garlic bread. We drove home to a dark house, and when we walked in the house from the garage door, the lights flashed on, and about 10 of my friends screamed, all in their PJs. The day after the slumber party, we ice skated and naturally crescendoed into pizza with black olives. At 16, I was invited over by a new friend, Debbie, my first real Italian friend. She had recently moved to town and joined the volleyball team. For a season kickoff dinner, her mom invited the team to dinner. Oh my goodness. I have to say that prior to the moment of taking this first bite of her mom's 5-meat sauce, I had never considered reincarnation as a real possibility. I remember lying in bed that night and thinking, I must have been Italian in a past life. I mean, how can you taste something so delicious that it connects with every fiber of your being and not search for a spiritual answer? Fortunately, Debbie and I were fast friends for other reasons as well, but her house and her mom became a magnet to my love of pasta and all things Italian food. Okay, let's fast forward to college. I'll give you a tip. Pasta is cheap. Pizza costs a little more, and you can always split it with friends, but pasta, you can always eat pasta pretty darn cheaply. Okay, for future reference, I suggest 2 budget levels. For those times when you're really hard up, ramen noodles are 25 cents a package at Walmart. When I was in college, you could get 10 for $1, on sale, 12 for $1. When your bank account is slightly more padded, any kind of pasta is pretty cheap, and ragu jarred sauce tastes perfectly fine when topped with plenty of Parmesan cheese. You now know 60% of my food intake from ages 20 to 25, 30% was pizza, the remaining 10% I did manage to fit in some fruits and vegetables. Thank goodness I live in Chicago now, because a person who grows up on the West Coast really has no idea what magic Chicago pizza is. Imagine my amazement when my first pizza arrived and was cut in squares. Some people don't really like this, but when you love pizza, you don't really care for one. For two, it somehow justifies eating slightly more pizza because you just plain lose count of how much you've actually consumed. My freshman year of college, on the eating out or ordering in front was largely devoted to pizza exploration. Living in a dorm, you're captive to whatever the cafeteria serves, but my spending money went toward experimenting with as many different pizza places as possible. Fortunately, I was able to rally like-minded friends who were willing to pool their money and execute this finely tuned plan. I actually had a map of the western suburbs with concentric circles spanning out from Wheaton. From the Yellow Pages, I identified the various specialty pizza places and managed to obtain menus. I had no car, and this was before the internet, so please be impressed with my high level of motivation. Once a month, we took the Metro into Chicago and sampled what I perceived to be even more authentic pizza. Ultimately, my number one pick was Pizzeria Uno. If you have never been there, go, like this weekend. It's in the River North area, just a block or two off Michigan Avenue. That became my home away from home when the budget allowed. After I started making slightly more money at the age of 25, I went there so often they knew my order. I went during off hours when crowds were low, and by then I had made this transition to the beauty of calzones. Even Debbie's mom had not exposed me to calzones. To this day, when I return to my hometown, I religiously visit Debbie's mom. My love for her is intricately woven into my love for her food. Have you ever really traced some of the roots of whatever food it is that you cherish, the emotional aspects of it, and specific memories that ground it in your earthly existence? I find it really hard to conceive that there are people in the world who don't share my passion for pasta, pizza, and bread. But for the many who do, I hope my story will feel both familiar as well as mouthwatering. And that sometime you will join me for a feast or even a mini feast of any of the trio of my favorite foods. I'm in room 014. Please come visit. Let's talk food. Let's live to eat.
All right, maybe some of you can relate to the passion for pizza and pasta. This is Ms. Angelos, so let's see if perhaps she's the one telling the lie.
That was awesome. Okay. As a little girl, I used to think my great-grandmother, my Nana, was kind of famous. She, like Audrey Hepburn, wore thick black glasses with pointy corners, and she always had on bright red lipstick. Her perfectly curled hair was a pinkish shade of brown that I had never seen on anyone then or now. Nana took care of my brother and I over summers. Even in the heat, she was always dressed in warm polyester tones with pencil skirts and flowy blouses, but that seemed really fancy to this little girl being raised by total hippies. Her papa, my Papa Clyde, on the other hand, was simple and quiet and hardworking. He did wear colorful suspenders with his white tank tops, and he was always busy tinkering around with something around the house. They lived in Chicago, near St. Michael's, in Old Town. Their apartment, I remember, was immaculate, plastic-covered everything. I remember my thighs sticking to the couch cushions on each and every visit. And I used to think that was their plan, using plastic like two-sided tape so us grandkids would sit still and listen to them. We were a compulsory audience. They were a typical old Irish couple who sat around, drank tea, and retold stories. My favorite story that Nana told was when she believed she experienced divine intervention. At a difficult time in their lives, when they literally had almost no money at all, they met a man who offered my Papa Clyde the best side job imaginable. This man called himself the secretary to an eccentric artist who needed a caretaker for his Chicago art studio. If things were kept tidy and safe, the payment was a rent-free apartment attached to the studio. That artist was a very well-known painter named Ivan Albright, who was famous for his painting in the film adaptation of Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray. If you've ever been to the Art Institute, you've probably seen his incredible work, The Door, The Seaman. His dark, mysterious creations are so meticulous, they're disturbing. Papa told us all about how Mr. Albright learned his gruesome style from painting corpses at a hospital during World War I, and that he took years to finish one piece, painting thin lines over and over again with a single hair of a paintbrush, and Papa admired that. To my great-grandparents, though, what mattered most was Mr. Albright's kindness and generosity. They believed that one man, one side job, one rent-free apartment changed their family's future. Years later, Papa died and Nana moved to a retirement home. After going through all of her belongings, she gifted 4 granddaughters each an Ivan Albright painting that he had given to Papa. The paintings were nothing like his gloomy portraits of diseased humans. Nana said he just did them for fun while on vacation. They were stunningly beautiful canvases where he painted blue skies, vibrant white crashing waves, and green and brown coastlines. Although they were incredible, Somehow my aunt had packed them away in her attic, and we all forgot about them. Until my healthy obsession with the Oprah Winfrey Show. In January of 2000, in the final minutes of one of my Oprah shows, I heard the announcer call, "If you believe you have something unique and of value, please head down to Harpo Studios this Saturday between 8 and 10 a.m. for the opportunity to have it appraised by Antiques Roadshow." I love that show too. I immediately called my mother and asked if I could bring Nana and Papa's paintings. She wasn't really as excited as I was. She said she'd have to go to Mary's house to pick them up in McHenry, and they weren't really his typical style. She didn't even think they were signed, so they probably weren't worth anything. But I promised her I would take care of everything if I could just go. And I'm glad I did. That Saturday, I froze my butt off outside Harpo Studios while in line for 3.5 hours. I questioned my resolve, but Nana and Papa's spirit kept me there. When I finally made it inside the studio doors to the appraiser's table, they only took about 3 minutes to look them over and smiled and said, "The Oprah Winfrey Show will send a limousine to your home next Wednesday at 6:30 a.m. You, as the original presenter of the paintings here today, will be the one on stage with Oprah. And you may bring 5 guests for the audience." My first thought was, well, that went well. And then, my mother's going to kill me. She was a bigger fan than I was, and I'm sure she thought she'd get the credit and be able to do something about this, but she was happy for me when we spoke. So the big morning came. My mother, and her 3 sisters joined me for our first limousine ride ever, so we acted a fool and had a blast. I ate in the green room. I had my makeup professionally done in the dressing room. I met Oprah's 2 Cocker Spaniels. I gave an interview to one of her staff members so they could create what they call paper notes on those blue cards that talk show hosts use. And I waited and I waited and I waited because I was the last guest, and it seemed to take forever. It's still a bit of a blur, but Oprah called me to the stage. She asked me a couple of questions, told me I was shaking, and put her arms around me and turned me to face a huge screen with an electronic spinning wheel, kind of like The Price is Right. She said, "Look up there to see what your paintings are worth." And as the wheel kept spinning and spinning, increasing the estimated value of the paintings, I so wished that my great-grandmother, in her red lipstick and her pencil skirt, could have had this privilege. I imagine Papa Clyde in the audience beaming at his wife like he always did on stage. I too believe there must have been some sort of divine intervention through this really wild ride, as I turned to my left and saw Oprah hugging me, and then I turned to my right and saw $60,000 flashing on the screen.
Those are 3 really good stories. Want this one? All right, so we are going to give you the chance. We have about 5 minutes probably for questions. And so we are going to allow you to ask some questions that you have to try to determine which of these stories is not true.
Raise your hand if you have a question for any of the 3.
There's one back there, Mr.
There's one
Schmidt.
way back there. Okay.
Dr. Nelson,
Yes.
what's your favorite type of pizza?
Now, I still do go with black olives on everything, but I would have to say that like the meat lovers pizza, topped with black olives has to be my number 1. Thank you.
All right, we have a question over here.
Dr. Nelson, do you
Yes.
like the school pizza?
Okay, so the part of my script that I cut out were the rules that I have for myself now, so that I don't overconsume. I have to admit there are 2 things in the school cafeteria that I've never consumed: the pizza and the cookies. And the reason is because I will overdo if I do. However, every time I see you carrying around pizza, I have an internal vicarious pleasure, and I secretly nod and say, "You are onto something."
What questions did Oh my gosh. What questions did like Oprah ask you?
I'm loud enough, really. So she asked me how I got a hold of the paintings because she knew ahead of time that my great-grandparents had cleaned Ivan Albright's studio. But she wanted me to tell that on air to give it some context. And she asked me why I was there, and I had said that, similar to what I described here. And honestly, she kept repeating that I was shaking because I think my body was actually convulsing. And so she kept referencing, like, are you okay? You're really shaking a lot. And it was toward the end of the show, and I remember all the people before me had talked really long. And so I think they were trying to wrap it up, too. So she didn't ask me too many questions, but it was pretty fun.
We have one over here.
Miss Belstra, how many people were in the boat with you, and what were their names?
Amy, Jeff, Molly, Corey, Chris, and the guide who's, I'm calling Gus. I really don't remember his name, but I just like Gus, so.
Dr. Nelson, what was the name of the, you said it was a Western phenomenon, pasta restaurant. What was the name of it?
Oh, Spaghetti Factory.
Okay, we have one here.
Dr. Nelson, what was Debbie's last name?
Okay, this is a cool story. Debbie's last name was actually Mackenzie. Her father was a full-blooded Irishman. Her mother was full-blooded Italian. So even though she had an Irish last name, the Italian came down from the mother bloodline.
Dr. Nelson, how much on average do you think you spent on pizza for college?
Oh, that's a good question. So I got an allowance from my parents during college, which I supplemented with my work at local frozen yogurt store. So I kept myself to a budget. So I would, each weekend, I said $7 would go toward pizza. So that's why I had to rally the group of friends to all pitch in together, and then we would pool our money for the pizza.
All right, we have about 2 minutes left. I have one question here. Mr. Schmidt, maybe you could do one more, and then we're going to vote.
Okay. Miss Belstra, what was it like when you were under the rapids? Like, what did you experience?
It was terrifying. It was terrifying. I always thought, I'm a pretty good swimmer. And so the water never scared me. And I had gone out of the boat several times before this, but I'd never gotten, it was almost like I was being recycled. Maybe that's a good way to put it. Like it kept pushing me down and down and down, and I couldn't come back up. It was, and the thing was I went under so fast, you didn't have that moment of, just taking a deep breath of air. And so, yeah.
All right, we are going to vote. Now, this is very scientific.
Sorry that we ran out of time, guys. I know a lot of people had questions.
All right, so what we're going to do is you are going to stand up, and if you're injured and can't stand, have someone stand for you. We are going to have you stand for the person that you think is lying. Mr. Schmidt's going to get a sense of who's standing for which person. So, if you think that Ms. Belstra is lying to you, please stand up. Oh, I see a lot of late stragglers. All right, have a seat. If you think that Dr. Nelson is lying to you, please stand up. All right, have a seat. And if you think that Ms. Angelos is lying to you, please stand up. All right. Can we please have the liar stand up? Thank you all very much. Have a wonderful rest of your day.